try to get minutes,
Okay.
and we'll get out the hook if we have to.
Great. Well, I am running for school board first and foremost because I'm passionate about schools. It's what gets me up every morning, is thinking about how to make schools better and how to make kids more successful and parents more satisfied with their options. I think that I'm uniquely qualified to serve on school board for 3 reasons. One, my education background. So I have experience both in schools, working as the head of HR at a similarly sized district, and then also most recently working nationally on practice and policy changes across the country. So bring both kind of a local and national view, which is really valuable for Bend. Second, business. I have really relevant business experience. I have an MBA, sitting on the school board now. This will be the 3rd $100 million plus budget that I've managed. I managed the HR budget for a school district from 2007 to 2012, so during a recession and budget cuts, so tough years to be managing a big budget. And then I'm also a local small business owner, so I have the perspective of someone running a business in Bend and trying to recruit and retain employees who need to find housing and have good schools in Bend. And then finally in the community, I was born and raised here. I plan to live here for the rest of my life. I did leave for 15 years, which I think, as I said, provides valuable experience outside of this community. But I'm very involved. My husband and I run our own foundation where we work really closely with 25 small nonprofit groups in both Bend and Lapine to make sure that they thrive. I'm the volunteer event manager and a board member of TEDx Bend, and we work closely with the schools to provide hundreds of free tickets so that students can experience that day. And then I volunteer at several schools, both in Bend and Lapine. So I think I'm just really uniquely qualified to be on the school board, and I want to, benefit our community, my kids, and every kid in Bend.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I think we could probably end the interview now. After that, that was very impressive.
Thank you.
If you were to have told me 6 months ago that I would be throwing my hat in the ring, I probably would have said that you were out of your mind. But it was really just on the prodding of a couple of the current board members, as well as one of the former board members, Nori, who recently stepped down, who recommended and tried to recruit me to run for the open school board seat. And I believe the reason that they did that is because they know my commitment to the district and to the schools. They know that for the past couple of years I've been on the PTA board of a local school. I've been on the site council, and most recently in the last year and a half I've been on the budget committee for the district. So they do have a personal interaction with me. They know that I can bring an outside perspective to the board. They know that I can bring an analytical mindset to the board. And they know that I can help contribute to the board or to the district, continue its advancement over the last 10, 12 years of that upward trajectory that it's followed, and really reach those high-level goals as they're dictated by the comprehensive long-term plan. So, I have those things, and then also in my background, I have a background in consulting as well as product management, which do require very high-level strategic perspectives, managing of multi-million-dollar budgets as well. I also currently sit on the board of Campfire Central Oregon, which services roughly 600 kids throughout the Central Oregon area, and we're looking to expand. So I'm familiar with being on the board of an organization. I have personal experience with the board, with the district, and I look forward to contributing more as a member of that school board starting this year.
Thanks.
Yeah.
The reason I decided to run for the school board is I ran 10 years ago and lost to Peggy Kincaid in that election, but I'm running for the same reasons today as I ran 10 years ago, is that as more and more of our educational locally gets mandated by the state and federal levels, our school district's starting to lose touch with our community and not having a dialogue with the community, and I think that's transpired in a couple different ways. Number one is the fact that we came within 2 hours of hurting, killing, or maiming some children in the Kenwood roof collapse. And since that time, the board spent more time trying to pick a hand-picked replacement for a 3-month term on the school board than they have talking about what happened, why it happened. And I would submit to you that if, God forbid, and thank God it didn't, somebody had gotten hurt, we'd be having a much different discussion today, and we should be having that same discussion today inside our community than we would have either way. And I'm the kind of person who can ask those questions that need to be asked. I have a background in asking questions, I have a background in construction, I have a background in being involved in this community, and I believe we have 1,800, or approximately 1,800 employees in the Ben Lapine school system, and arguably 900 of those are teachers, and they are education experts, and if they are asked correctly and asked to be part of the process, they'll help make the Ben Lapine school system the best that they can be. And I want to be there to ask those questions, especially with our school bond coming due, which is desperately needed, but somebody needs to ask. If we're going to spend $250 million, we need to be asking questions. I'm the person in the candidate position to do that.
Thanks.
Well, you kind of jumped us on the facilities management question, so Troy, why don't we come back to you? And what do you see the board's role in that safety facilities management? I mean, there's staff for that. What's the board's role in light of the roof collapse?
Well, they need to be asking the question, in light of the roof collapse. I mean, the first thing, I can't believe there haven't been community forums put in place to talk about what happened in a more public way. They rely on news releases and hope people come to their meetings, and we should be having a dialogue straightforward of what happened, why did it happen, and how we're not going to make it happen again. But the school board's job is to be a board of directors. They have one employee, that's the superintendent, to set direction and budget for, and they should be asking those questions, why wasn't it done, and making sure over time. Andy Hyatt asked at a school board meeting that they needed to consider that before it ever happened, have a facilities review, and it never got any traction in the board.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with Troy with respect to the response to the roof collapse. It could have been a huge tragedy, and the conversation would have been very different if it had happened a couple hours later. I did attend that school board meeting right after the collapse, and some of the school board members did ask why it happened and what was being done, but I think heads should have been exploding at that point, and really demanding sort of an adequate response. So I got a feeling that there was some circling on the wagons going on, but as a school board, as the elected representatives of the community, you have to provide that voice to the community. And the entity that was providing the real voice to the community was really the Ben Bulletin. They were asking all the hard questions, they were demanding the email trail. And it was their digging that discovered that the initial press release that stated that they were working on the roofs for weeks prior to that wasn't actually true. So I think it's incumbent on the board to really dig into that, do a postmortem, if you will, on how that can be avoided. That kind of conversation didn't really occur during the board meeting. If I was on the board, that would be priority number one for the conversation, and how to proactively prevent something like that from happening again. And also, if it really comes down to somebody taking the blame for that, the board really needs to demand a shuffling of the management in order to make sure that the right people are in place so that kind of thing doesn't happen again.
Carrie, what's the role of the board?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with almost everything that both of them said. I think that, we have a couple of roles. One is to provide vision, to set the goals and the parameters with which the administration, how they spend their priorities. And the second is around fiscal responsibility and transparency with the community. On the upcoming bond in particular, I was really glad to see that the board budgeted for an audit of every major project in the bond so that the community will receive an objective review of making sure that the money is being spent well. But I think that we can't forget that although we have to spend critical time on safety, we also need a vision for the future. And I think that's where I have something unique to bring. I spend a lot of time nationally thinking about how to build schools that will help students meet the needs of the future economy. And they don't need to be more expensive. In fact, many times they can be less expensive, but they may need to look differently. And so I would love to see us use this opportunity with the bond to not only make sure that we're addressing critical safety and communication concerns, but also that we're looking way out into the future for what schools need to look like to prepare our students for a different world than the one that we went to school with. So I don't want to lose sight of that vision component and setting a high bar for the district to have real vision around facilities, as well as dealing with the nuts and bolts and deferred maintenance and all of that fun stuff.
I'm curious, just, it sounds like part of what your feedback on this process was the communication you felt wasn't ideal after the collapse and perhaps even before. Let's say this issue had never happened, or let's say we're beyond this, we've solved this problem with the facilities and the collapse. What are other issues that you'd like to take on besides this communication /
Well, if we're going to have to this is not the last bond measure we're ever going to have, the last school we're going to have to build in the city of Bend if things continue to grow. And having only 15% of the budget has any discretionary money in it, the rest of it's dictated by the states and the feds how it's going to be spent. And if you have to go out you pick it 5 years, whatever the term is in between, and go out and get public support, you need to be talking to the public all the time. And the current school board spends lots of time talking among themselves, doing everything they can not to really reach out to the public and find ways to bring the public in. And I think there's a plan needs to be put together to how do we get the public involved now, before we're out with hat in hand asking for a budget. And that's the biggest thing. I don't see them being proactive and staying connected with the community as they should, or as they did in my youth.
Mm-hmm. I know it's a bit of a convoluted question, but I guess the question was, if we are beyond the school collapse issue, what would you see as one of any of the other large challenges that we need to be facing?
No, there's no question that things are going fine. It seems like they're going pretty well now. But with the looming biennium budget, that's sort of going to impose a lot of cuts, even just to maintain the status quo. It's going to be tricky to navigate that, and I think one of the things that the district needs to do, first of all, is, like Troy said, they need to be more proactive, reaching out to the community. That's one of the pillars of my campaign, is to push the district to really try to partner, identify key stakeholders that are outside of the district. So, for example, parents, which is an obvious stakeholder. It's kind of done at a school-by-school basis right now. I think it's incumbent on the district to really reach out to parents in a coordinated effort to be part of that process of educating the students. And then also partnering with nonprofits in the community, after-school programs, at least create a database of after-school programs that they can then communicate and market to the parents, because it's pretty, it's been proven that after-school programs and parent engagement really help in the success of the kids academically. So it's those types of things, also partnering with the business community to really get a good understanding of what are going to be those requirements for the students when they graduate. Because yeah, there's a good chunk of students that do have aspirations to go to college, but there's also a good number of students that they're fine doing more of the trade work, and that's a perfectly fine career to choose. And I don't know if the schools are necessarily focused on that aspect of it, of CTE. So, you know, it's those types of things, and I think partnering with the community, you know, as Troy was suggesting, it's kind of like a big, to me, it's a big ROI type thing, right? So it requires very minimal investment, but you get a very good return from that because it's kind of like a public-private partnership, right? So it's that kind of thing that I'll be pushing. Also, on the state level, I'd like to, you know, try to get involved, at least, you know, at the Oregon School Board Association level, to try to lobby the state to try to bring back those funding levels, because you know, the cuts that they're talking about now, it's just going to come even more so in the future, and if we ever get hit with a recession, I mean, it's going to be really ugly. So I think it's even more important that individual districts get involved and try to coordinate their lobbying efforts on the revenue side.
I have a few additional priorities that come both from my own experience in education as well as talking with hundreds of parents and teachers and community members in Ben Lapine. One is closing the achievement gap and increasing our graduation rates and college matriculation rates. I think there is sort of this feeling that the schools in Bend are good, and they are, but they fall below average in a number of categories. And I believe that Bend is better than average and that we can be doing better. So all but one of our area high schools is graduating less students than similar school districts around the country. Our ELL student, or around the state, our ELL students are doing worse in Bend than they're doing in similar districts around the state. So we have some real work to do, and that doesn't even count the extreme growth that's happening. We're growing at a rate of 300 to 500 kids a year. That's an elementary school a year. We're facing budget cuts. So we have some real work to do around academic achievement, and that's where I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to get more kids prepared for college or a satisfying career. And I think it's important for voters to know, and for you to know if you don't, that currently only one other board member has any experience working in education. And not that every board member needs that experience, but it's experience that is severely lacking in Ben Lapine right now. And you don't ask tough questions and know how to provide vision around things like closing the achievement gap and increasing graduation rates and increasing ELL performance if you haven't studied the research and been in schools and know what works and doesn't. So I think that's really important to bring to the board. Another priority that I have, which Troy got to a little bit, but I have a lot of experience, a proven track record of making this happen, is empowering our educators. Our teachers face a lot of restrictions. You know, a lot of times they're told you will teach from this page of this curriculum at 11 a.m. on Tuesday morning for 90 minutes. And that just makes it really difficult to meet every student's unique needs, and it makes it really difficult for teachers to have joyful, enjoyable careers. So I'd really like to see us empower our educators and work towards a more personalized education for our students. Personalization is the future. We don't need to give 30 students all the same paper worksheet anymore. We know how to do better. We have better technology. So those are two other priorities that I have.
Troy, we didn't really ask you priorities. What would you see as the district's priorities?
Well, past communication, I think we need to, number one, make sure that we take care of the taxpayers' dollars that are out there, and that's going to be true with getting a quarter, if we pass the bond measure, or when we pass the bond measure, getting $250 million to build schools. We need to make sure that we have fiscal responsibility and somebody's asking the same right questions, and the audits are getting done right, and the right questions are getting asked in the audits that are going on. We definitely need to make sure how we up our graduation rates, how we take care of that, and basically just make sure that our teachers, the 900 experts in education that we have in our district, are getting the full support they can to educate our children.
Well, we touched a little bit on budget, but this is just such a big piece of the puzzle here, and you know, the bond and the others. So my question is, you know, in the budgeting and planning for new schools as we grow, what's your experience in budgetary budgetary arenas, and how do you see that experience benefiting the board?
Let's start with Ricardo.
So my most direct experience is obviously being on the district budget committee, so I've been through that cycle once. I understand the process. I understand the budget document. I already have, very basic recommendations about how to improve that process and how to improve the final document, because it's not only, a budget is not just an operating document, it's also a means of communication to the community, right? And they post that thing online. Anybody can access it, anybody can read it, but if you read it now, it's really hard to sift through that information, right? And then part of it is requirements at the state level of how they do the line items. But I think the district can definitely go further in terms of clarifying how the long-term comprehensive strategy filters down into the budget. Right now, they make a valiant effort to make that leap, but it's still a huge leap of faith that the community members on the board, on the committee, sort of have to do already. So since we have to make that leap of faith, I can't imagine that people on the community can really do that. So that's something that I'm really going to be pushing forward. Being on the Campfire board, I've been through several budget cycles through that. Granted, it's a fraction of what the district is doing, but it's kind of a similar situation, trying to service a much smaller population in the district. And then also, my past experience, again, with consulting to large multinational companies, doing massive technology installations, and then also product management for large technology companies. So there was also multi-million-dollar budgets that had to be dealt with there and managed and forecasted. So those kinds of things I can bring to the floor. I've spent the last 16 years managing a little investment fund. So, the involvement in that is taking a look at financial statements left and right and working with spreadsheets nonstop. So I'm very comfortable with the numbers, very comfortable diving down, and very comfortable asking tough questions about what goes into that budget, what kind of basic assumptions they're making, what kind of forecasts they have, what kind of rules they have to abide by that are dictated by the state as well as the district. Those kinds of things I have no problem diving down. So that's what I bring.
Similarly, I love Excel. I create Excel spreadsheets for everything. I've done a lot of my own data analysis, and I'm definitely a data and financial geek in my personal life. I already mentioned that I managed the HR portion of a school district budget, which is about 85% of the budget during 5 budget cycles, most of which were budget cut years. I think that, and I now, with my national nonprofit, work with a number of large city budgets that are in the multiple hundreds of millions of dollars. One thing that I would really like to see, it's hard to do, but as Rick said, the budget right now is really difficult to engage with because it's done by line items that aren't connected to goals or outcomes. So I would love to see us do a better job. We have 8 board end goals, which supposedly drive the direction of the district. But when there's not a clear path from how the budget is being spent to those end goals, and you don't really have a good sense of whether where we're saying our priorities are actually match where we're putting our money, it's really hard for the community to have a dialogue. So I would also love to see more community engagement, and I don't know if that needs to take happy hours or office hours or town halls. It's awesome that people like Rick sit on a budget committee, but that's a really small number of people. And so making the budget more accessible, making sure that we're clear on the board and that the administration is clear if money is going where we actually say that it should be based on our priorities. But yeah, love digging into budgets and definitely comfortable in that realm.
I spent 20 years in corporate America running large manufacturing facilities with hundreds of people and multi-million-dollar budgets. Did multi-million-dollar construction projects that I oversaw, and was the end of the line when it came to looking for somebody to blame if somebody went wrong. And so I'm comfortable with budgets and worked a lot with budget. But the biggest thing that we have to do as a school board in Bend LaPointe is help our constituencies understand where the money comes from what the restrictions are paid up, because we knew just through the gas tax debate, if you read any of the Facebook blogs or anything, people don't understand the difference between the school board, the park district, the transit district, you name district, soil and water district, whatever it is out there. And we need to help understand and be leaders in doing that, because that's essential in getting bond measures passed down the way. And those are the things that aren't going on right now to help people understand it.
Yeah, we had a few confused Facebook people during the gas tax.
Yes, there was.
I just as a follow-up, I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned briefly just you're taking a leap of faith on the budget. How do you go deeper, and how do you find those inconsistencies or those places to save money? Do you have thoughts on that? I'll start with you.
Yeah, to me, and this is probably my consulting background that's coming forward, there's always a focus on, I'm a big believer in best practices, right? And, that's something that we can easily do now, because it used to be that if you wanted to understand how I would say, let's say like 15, 20 years ago, if you wanted to understand how other districts were doing things, you had to hire an expensive consultant, go out and talk to these districts and whatnot. Now you can go on the internet and you can find these reports that are ready for public consumption about how to do these things, right? And so for example, if you just do an easy, quick Google search, there's there's like a Government Finance Officers Association, right, for example. And they have membership across the country. A lot of school districts are members of them. And they, they have developed best practices for budgeting. Not just the process, but the final document. And if you look at, one of the things they held out as a great example of a solid budget, and which I agree after reading it, is the Lane, the Lane School District here in Oregon. And when you read through it, they start top down, and it's very clear what the priorities are, what the long-term strategy is, how it breaks down into the individual main components of the budget, and then finally in the details of the budget. So it's that kind of thing. After you read it, you go, oh yeah, I totally understand what's going on now and how those priorities filter down to the detail level, and school by school and whatnot. And that's even one criticism of the budget that we have here. They don't even break it down the budget by school, so you don't even know like what the progress, what the year by year budgeting is that each of the individual schools are receiving, right? So it's things like that that I think are easy fixes, and it's really just a question of being comfortable to push the district to adopt those things, and embrace that kind of change, because in the end it benefits everyone. And obviously it's there's resistance because this is the way that we've been doing things for years, and we have dictates from the state level. But if you approach it from a research-based kind of perspective and best practices, then I think you can sort of push the district little by little to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. I think we went to you next on this one, Carrie.
Sure, yeah. I think that's exactly right. So I'll just take it a step further on 2 points. One is that when I'm looking at best practices, I'm looking for how to keep the most amount of money closest to the kids. So I'm dialing into those budget lines that are about teachers and resources in the classroom, and then at the school level, and then working their way up. And when you've got to make tough decisions, you've got to start with cuts furthest away from the kids and back into cuts closest to kids. And then the other thing I may have just forgotten.
Well, we won't keep it too
Yeah.
long.
You can come back to me.
Can you restate the question one more
So
time?
the question is, I was piggybacking off something that Rick said. He was talking about when you're looking at the budget numbers, sometimes you have to take a leap of faith in some of the data, and that I was curious, how do you go deeper? How do you actually find what's happening there? So as you were proposing, let's find places to maybe trim the fat. I don't know.
Well, and I don't know if it's trim the fat.
Okay.
That isn't what I was trying
Okay.
to put in place. Is make sure our money is spent the best way, because
Okay.
we're going to get some
Fair.
certain amount of money from our friends at the state,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't know what that is yet, but we're going to get it, and we're going to have to manage beside that. And so, how do you do the most with the limited amount of funds that you get out there?
And how do you identify the places where there might be where you're getting vague information, if you are getting vague information or stuff where you're not exactly sure, you're taking a leap of faith, how do you actually find out what the reality is, and how do you translate that into?
Well, it comes back to making sure you ask questions. You dive down into it and start asking questions. I'm not talking nuts and bolts questions, but you ask the questions of staff to pull out where the opportunities are, and then you go back to those 900 specialists that we have that are teachers in our district and ask them and engage them and get them to be part of it, because they're the experts that will tell how budgets will be best spent in a classroom.
I can add quickly.
Let's
I
move on.
remembered. Okay.
We're good on the budget
Yeah.
issue. So, I mean, extrapolating on the funding problem that's facing the state with its need for PERS, the weighted PERS on the budget, and the fact that Measure 97 failed across the state, what do you see, or how would you characterize the problem that Oregon faces? Is it a revenue problem? Is it an expenses problem? And, you know, as somebody who we're trying to put in a position to advocate for us in Salem, how do you go forward?
Yeah, it's obviously a really complex and nuanced problem. And as with most things, there is likely a revenue problem and an expense problem. I will be clear that revenue is not always the answer. There's no correlation to how much is spent on schools and the results that they get around the country. And so we can always do more and better with what we have. However, Oregon is low on the revenue side. And so it's worth exploring every option possible if we can get the community, whether that's our local community or the state community, behind a revenue solution that's viable. We should absolutely go after it. But we also need to focus in on the decisions that are easier and directly under our control, which is how to spend the money that we have. And you know, I'm just digging into our budget. And so there's a lot to explore there, but this is probably one of our biggest roles on the school board, and we've got to be really aggressive with both, advocating locally and at the state level about revenue options, and doing the best that we can with the money that we have.
So, but you don't have any specific revenue options that you would like to see the state? Another Measure 97, a gas tax, you know, so
yeah, I mean,
of these kind
I think I have seen, you know, many ideas work in other states, and so there's certainly a list that you can start going down. I have not worked deeply in Oregon enough to know which of those we've tried and which we haven't, and which are more viable, but I will start digging into it very soon.
Troy?
Well, the biggest problem we have to start off with is we do our budgeting at the state level backwards. Schools come last, and they budget everything first. And it should be the other way around. We should know what the school budget is by now and be able to implement it and then figure out the rest of the state budget from that. So that's the first thing as advocate, as school board advocate. We have to say schools need to come first, and how are we going to fund schools, and figure out the rest later. This biennium, revenue is going to be up 6 to 8% higher than it was at all-time highs. So we have a spending problem by definition to figure out part of that. Now that doesn't mean the third part is that the way we get our revenue is archaic. Our tax code's basically 100 years old, and it's time for Oregon to sit down and legislators to get real and figure out what the tax code should be that's fair and honest and bring around the trust of the people. And that's what's been lost, and then I'm worried about being lost here and locally from our school district is the trust and the confidence of the people, so that when it's an emergency and you tell them we have to do something this way, you get the benefit of the doubt and you have the trust out there. And we don't have that right now because everybody's always trying to figure out how they're going to get gamed as we try to change the tax structure of our state.
How do you build that trust back up?
Well,
Is it possible?
Yeah, I'm an eternal optimist. I mean, I believe
We had another
there-
optimist in earlier.
I believe there is, but
Yeah.
you know, it's going to take people standing up and doing the right thing, just not what's politically palpable or gets you elected. And I went to Newt Bueller's open house on Friday, and You know, one of the things is that got the biggest applause was our redistricting system's broke. And it skews the political spectrum to safe seats, so you get even more extreme views on right and left. I mean,
Oh, yeah, gerrymandering.
yeah, it's that
We
kind
can,
of thing.
we can
So that,
talk
that
gerrymandering
would-
for a
Yeah.
long time.
yeah,
Exactly.
that would be one way to start, how
Yeah.
you start to build back that trust, is have a
Right,
honest and level playing field.
right.
Yeah, so I think there's two things that unfortunately have a detrimental impact to Ben Lapine as a district, and you know, definitely speaking selfishly because my kids are in Ben Lapine. But number one, you know, Oregon being one of the few states that collects the property taxes at a state level and then distributes it to the individual districts based on a formula for equity purposes, right? And so you have a situation where you have very highly valued property, which results in a high level of taxes coming out of our district. But because of equity reasons, we don't get that same amount of money back, right? And so I understand the equity reason behind that. And then number two, though, is the fact that we're a fast-growing district. Because the state tends to be very conservative with their assumptions about growth, not just in terms of number of students, but also in terms of the step up of the salaries and whatnot. Again, that's a negative impact on our district, in that we're just growing way too fast, and the amount of money that the state is allocating to us is way below what that expectation is. So, you know, undeniably, we have to address the cost issue, and we have to be as creative as we can. But I think ultimately we'll have to address the revenue issue.
Do you support that?
You know, if it's
Because there is no, I mean, they're looking for revenue
They are.
stream options, and those
And-
would be taxes. and-
exactly, and all the revenue options that are on the table are at the state level.
Mhm.
I feel that anything that's passed at the state level, we're going to get a smaller piece of that pie, right? Because of the situation that I spelled out. But if anything, if we really, really do have to address revenue, and it's an overwhelming consensus, right? To me, the only option really is a local option. So at least in a local option, the people of the community can dictate what the taxes are going to be and where those taxes can go. And so we have much more control over that, as opposed to, and very few strings attached to it. As
And what does that
from the
mean if
state.
we're talking about you being the advocate in Salem?
So, you know, those things can happen in parallel where, and I'm not necessarily advocating that we do a local option now, but it's only if it's considered a necessity. But, you know, there's things that we can do definitely at the state level where we try to try to at least work with the legislators, or at least their staff, to modify their assumptions about growth, about the automatic salary increases for the teachers, which, for example, they factor in like a 3% growth in salaries, but that's just that's just the automatic increases, I believe, but that doesn't take into account step-ups, where, you know, a teacher gets an additional credential, they automatically get a pay raise. So, you know, it's those kinds of things that they need to be educated by the individual school boards as a collective, lobbying group to try to make those adjustments, right? Otherwise, the district is just going to continue to get shortchanged by the state.
Carrie, if Measure 97, when Measure 97 came around, the school board, one of the only school boards, if not the only, voted against. Were you in support of that?
Was I in support of
would
the
you
school
have-
board taking a position, or in support of Measure
School-
97?
Uh,
I was
Double
not in
negative.
support of the school board taking a position, especially because they were the only one to do so. If lots of school boards were jumping into the conversation, then that may have warranted having the conversation about whether our local school board should have also jumped in. But I think it was not a good decision to take a strong position on an education funding issue, to be the only board to do so. It sends a really mixed signal to your educators that are trying to work without a lot of revenue.
Troy?
Well, Measure 97 was a Band-Aid tax, and it was a flawed measure, and that's why it went down. I differ from the standpoint that I thought the school board showed leadership in coming out in a position against 97 because they knew that it would hurt the overall fundraising for schools down the road. And so I supported them in doing what they did.
I personally did not support 97 just because of the way that it was written. There were no controls about whether or not the new revenue would be directed 100% towards schools. The state legislature could have funged the budget to kind of shift money around and kind of take over some of that money if they wanted to. So I think it was a poorly, from what little I know of it, I think it was a poorly written piece of legislation. Having said that, I'm not sure if it was warranted for the school board to take a position, only because my understanding is that it was a 4-3 vote. So there was, it could have swung either way. And so if it was an overwhelming position by the board, then, you know, I think that probably would have been a good thing to do. But because it was just because of one person voting, could have easily flipped their vote and it could have swung the other way, I'm not sure if they could have been public about that position.
Should we move to a couple ideological things and then before we wrap this?
Yep.
So two things that came up that we discussed earlier. One is, do you believe climate change theory should be taught in schools? And I'll start with you.
Yeah, climate's been changing since the last ice age. And has always changed, and I don't see any problem with that as an educational tool.
Okay.
I think it's okay to teach about climate change. I think the schools are an environment for debate to occur. So in the sense that you're teaching it for the purposes of debating both sides, because there's very strong views on both sides, I think that's a fine thing to do.
So in this case, the other side would be a creation theory. Is that?
No. So the other side being, to what extent does anthropomorphic climate change really result in a future catastrophic event? And I think the percent chance can probably be debated.
Okay.
So
Thanks for clarifying that.
yeah.
I think that science should be taught in our schools, and therefore the latest science and information that we have around climate change should absolutely be taught. It's probably one of the greatest obstacles facing mankind, and we should present it as the reality of the best we know. So it's important to let students know that for example, the vast majority of scientists believe in climate change. There's a smaller percentage who don't. We can have a debate and talk about both of those sides, but it's important to be clear about what the science says, what the research says.
Rick, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure.
Do you feel that there's a role for religion in public schools?
Is there
If so,
a role for religion in public schools? Yeah, these are very touchy subjects that we're covering right now.
That's why I bring them up.
Yeah, exactly. No, I get it.
If they were easy, they wouldn't ask them.
Yeah, that's
Right. Oh, I gotta go to the restroom now. As far as a role,
Or what role? Or
yeah. I think, obviously religion played a critical role in the development of society. So from a perspective of curriculum, you have to teach that, what the role that religion played in the development of culture, the development of science, and the development of society in general, right? So from a historical perspective, I think it's very appropriate to teach that. As far as constitutionally speaking, the Constitution does protect religion. It doesn't advocate for a specific religion to be promoted above anything else, right? In terms of division of church and state. So, I think that if somebody does want to practice religion and it happens to be during the school hours, that they should not automatically reject that notion. So that's basically how I come down on it.
Well, I agree with the federal law as it stands now, which is that you can teach about religion in school as a historical and cultural context, part of what's important to understand about where we live and the world around us, but you can't teach religion. But I think that like any nonprofit or affinity group, that if a group of students, wants to form a club or have conversations about religion during off-school hours, that should be allowed along with any other affinity group.
The courts have been pretty clear about prayer in school and things like that, and that's the law of the land, and as a school board member I'd support it. And also support where they have the ability to go to off-site religious type activities, and that is just as important too. So I don't see any different from the status quo as it currently stands.
Well, status quo changes, and so we ask these questions because, there's always, should members of churches be allowed to come in during school hours and pamphlet or proselytize during the school day? Those are the kind of things that come up from time to time outside, and people support that in different ways.
One thing I want to add to that is,
Sure.
if I could, is that, there unfortunately, because of that, there was a rule that I think the district decided to just exclude all nonprofits because there was kind of an encroachment of certain religious groups into the schools, and there were a lot of complaints that came out of that, and so they said, the district decided we're just going to ban all nonprofit organizations from, not proselytizing, but marketing their services to the students, right? Which I think is an unfortunate thing that happened, because it caused the students and the families to kind of lose contact with a lot of very good services that they could be benefiting from. So it's kind of that kind of blanket ban that I think the district really needs to really think hard about before they start initiating it, right? They just took the easy way out. They said, okay, we're just going to ban everybody. But I think something like that needs to be rethought, and maybe a middle ground could be found.
Magdalena, you haven't had a chance. Is there anything you're thinking about?
I had a question about Benedict 7, but you took my question.
Oh.
No, but that's a hot topic issue. So I just had a question, maybe a little less touchy, a little bit more ideological, which is a good one. What should the school board be doing to better prepare children to be better citizens? So we're in a changing world, Bend is changing especially, so anything that you think is a top priority that we should be doing to better prepare children to be, engage in active citizens in this world. We could start with,
I think I'm keeping it still.
more of a vague and looser question for you.
Well, there's, you can't pick one priority that sets the tone for the changing world that we're in, but I just got done reading Thomas Friedman's book, Well, Thanks for Being Late, which is a great book, and now when I got all done with it, I wasn't sure whether I was optimistic or I was pessimistic when I got all done with it, but it gave me thought that we are in a changing world, and I look back at my life and I try to impart on my children, and I think as part of the school system, is change is inevitable, whether it's change in technology, change in how we learn, where we go. For me, it was whether I left Bend in 1980, this place was going to dry up and blow away. I was never going to be able to move back home because the mills were shutting down. And so that forced me to go to Corvallis, go to Ketchikan, Alaska, go to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, go to Washington, D.C., Norfolk, Nebraska, all the places in between with corporate America. And it was the greatest growth experience I ever had because it showed me change. It showed me how to adapt to environments. And so if we instill that in our kids in their educational system, how they learn and how they use things after their education, the first part of their education is done because education is ongoing.
Does that translate to like a specific, tangible way, to push that kind of mentality that the world is ever changing? Is there anything specific that?
Well, I think it's, from the time my kids started, when my kids started in kindergarten, there was no such thing as an iPad.
Mm-hmm.
Today, everybody's got an iPad, and it's getting them ready those, I don't know if you can take just one thing and say, this is a priority, because that's gonna change down the road. It would be adaptable learners over time is probably the thing I'd put in place.
Yeah, I think if you were to look at the comprehensive long-term plan that's already laid out for the district, they spell out, 3 major priorities for the kids, right? World-class academics, thriving citizen, future ready, and they have specific, goals in mind for each of those things. But when you think about it, that's a lot to take on, right, for a school. And you're really demanding a lot from your schools, and we should demand a lot. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there's already a lot of things in the community that can help to complement that and shore up, some of those objectives, right? Campfire, which is an organization I'm on the board of, they talk a lot about teaching kids how to have a growth mindset and thrive as a community citizen, right? As a contributing citizen. When you talk about Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, the Boys and Girls Club, there's tons of these things all over the place already. And I think that's why I come back to the point of, in terms of most bang for the buck, what the district can do is really reach out to those groups and to the business community as well, to try to bring them in. For example, bringing in businesses to really educate kids about what other alternative careers there are out there outside of college. And obviously you have college day as well and whatnot. But there are so many opportunities for the district to invest just a little bit of money to reach out there to the community and bring those groups in to really round out the education and teach them how to be thriving citizens. And just within the district itself, like Troy and Steshman, I'm sure Carrie can speak hours about, is the use of technology, because of the fact that that's the competitive edge right now, right? Using technology to individualize education, whether it's flipped classrooms and blended learning and that kind of thing, to really get the most out of the limited instructional time that the kids have in class. So it's those 2 things that I think are key, and which are things that I would push heavily if I was on the school board.
It's a really good question, and I think it's important for us to be really clear about what we can do on the board specifically. And so, we can do kind of 3 or 4 main things. We can set goals and limitations. So what do we want you to strive for, and then what are the parameters within which you can do that? Where should budget follow that money, and how can partners help us? And so, I really support the fact that the board goals right now include things outside of math and reading. They include things like school culture, and are students happy and engaged in school? Are we meeting our goals around skills like communication and collaboration, not just math, reading, science, and social studies? And so I think they've made some good steps in setting some goals. And then we need to be really careful how we're measuring it. What gets measured gets done. So we need to make sure that we're really making room for teachers to spend time on things, whether it's arts and culture and civic responsibility and these things that are sort of outside of the 3 R's. And then, like Rick said, we have a real role around partnerships. I don't see as much partnering and community collaboration across both all the boards, school board, parks board, city council, nonprofits, Boys and Girls Club. So I would work really hard. It's part of my DNA is just partnerships and engaging and networking and talking to people and figuring out, teachers can't do it all. And so we've really got to rely on the community to help bring some of that into kids' lives.
Well, our time is going to close. It's impossible in this hour for us to ask everything I'm sure that you guys want to talk about. So in this last round, if you want to just speak to something that you feel strongly about that we haven't asked, or something in closing that you think we ought to know, then that'll be the time. Carrie, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, actually, I think you've asked really thoughtful questions. I really appreciate you giving the opportunity for the public to actually see this interview. I know you'll make a decision as well, but giving people the opportunity to actually hear the answers and form their own judgments is of real value to the community. So I thank you for that, and I feel like I've actually had the opportunity to say what I want to say. So thank you.
Great. Troy?
Oh,
All right.
go ahead.
I was,
I know.
I'm still going clockwise. I don't want to throw too much in there.
there's a curveball there. Well, I appreciate the time and the opportunity to come talk to you guys today. It's been beneficial and it's good to hear what everybody has to say. At the end of the day, we're at a time where the world is changing, Central Oregon is changing, how we fund schools and the mandates we get are changing, and we need somebody who's going to ask the questions and be a leader, not a follower, and helping the state of Oregon from the local level, take the local perspective to our state, and help engage our community as part of that community, that discussion, and make them understand. So, thank you for your time.
Great.
And thank you as well to you folks for setting this up and for giving a forum for the rest of the community to really kind of see the kind of detailed thoughts that we have about a wide range of subjects. And you know, my final thought is that there really is no, there's no magic bullet to solving the problem of making our schools better. It's really just a tough slog you got to go through, incrementally improve every year. But it's those types of things that I feel that I can bring to the table. Keeping the end goal in sight and continuing to push the district to look at themselves and say, what can we do better, and what we're doing well, and can we spread that out to the rest of the district? And that's what I think I can bring to the board. So, thank you.
Great. Well, we would like to thank you guys for community service and being willing to step out there and really put yourself forward and endure our questions
Yeah.
and be on camera and be in this uncomfortable environment, and do it for all the right reasons, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for.
You guys
Very
have
nice to
almost
see
all
you.
the time we talk
It
about.
was
Thank
nice
you.
to meet you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah.
So when is it going to be posted online?
Hopefully I
Thank
will
you.
be able to do it by tomorrow afternoon.
Oh, great,
Yeah.
okay. The full unedited version?
Yeah.
That's great.
The whole
Thank you.
thing, so
Thank you.
it's the beginning.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great meeting you. Thanks so much. Now I'll take that kombucha.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome to